Welcome to the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. I'm your host, Brian Briscoe with Streamline Capital and Tribe of Titans. So today I have a confession to make. And you may have realized that I have been less and less consistent with publishing new podcast episodes. Well, today that's what I want to talk about and where the podcast is going from here. So in the last 8 months, I've started a new investment company, that's Streamline Capital Group. I hired 3 full-time people to help with both that and the coaching program that I also started earlier this year. And I've also been involved in 7 different acquisitions in 5 different states, including the first for the newly formed Streamline Capital Group, which was the Eleanor Rigby Apartments in Salt Lake City, Utah. Now, by the way, if you are invested in learning more about investing in Streamline Capital Group or joining my coaching program, definitely reach out. But that's not the purpose of what we're talking about today. So with all of that stuff going on in the last 8 months, I got extremely busy. All right. And this podcast ended up being the thing that dropped off. When you look at how many things I had going on, very slowly, we started recording fewer and fewer episodes. And eventually we got to the point where we're at right now where, I haven't published an episode in 3 weeks. So to those that enjoy listening to the podcast, I am sorry. And to those who are waiting to be on the podcast, I know there's several people on that aspiring investor list, I am especially sorry, right? Which brings me to my next point. Since I've taken a break, even though it was it wasn't a deliberate break, but when I realized that I started taking a break and I hadn't done a lot of stuff lately, I honestly considered stopping the podcast altogether, and for a couple of reasons. Number one, there is a significant time commitment to doing this. And there's also a significant financial commitment to doing this. When we were releasing 3 episodes per week between the pre-production, post-production, which I had other people do for me, I was spending about $2,000 a month on it, right? So time commitment and money commitment. And, the third thing that really I think was the crux is I was getting bored with the podcast, right? And it's really hard to admit, and it took me a while to figure it out, but I was very much getting bored with the podcast. I've recorded 458 episodes to date, and guess what? They're all exactly the same. I bring on an experienced investor, they tell me their story. I bring on an aspiring investor, they tell me their story, and then they ask a bunch of questions. Well, what I was finding is, as I was recording these, it just wasn't fun for me. I was hearing very similar stories with a different name and a different face. And I got to the point too, I wasn't even remembering the people or the episodes that came on the people that came on my podcast or the episodes that we published, right? So I realized at that point that I had to change something, right? And that's what we're here, next thing, that's what we're going to be talking about is we are going to make some changes. I'm not 100% sure exactly what all of those changes look like, but we are going to make some changes. All right. Now, deep down, I love the podcast. I really do. I love podcasting, but even more so, I love what this podcast has done for other people. And when I was thinking about stopping the podcast altogether, I got an email from somebody. It was somebody who has been on the podcast as an aspiring investor almost 3 years ago. And she made an email introduction to me to somebody that she thought would be a good partner. I work in the Salt Lake area. That's where our acquisition focus is. And it was somebody who lived in the Salt Lake area. So here's the email she wrote. And this is just the part that applies to me. She's telling the other guy, Brian here is one I consider giving me my big break in the multifamily world. And then she puts in parentheses, I don't even know if I've ever told Brian this. And then close parentheses, Brian hosts a very educational podcast that I had the privilege of speaking on, and I swear it changed my life, instilling confidence I didn't know I could have. Not to mention he has the best networking call out there. Brian's been killing it in the game, and I love cheering him on from the sidelines. You will be blessed to work with him. So first of all, thanks, Kim. I think you saved this podcast with that email. Anyway, that's why I do it. That's why I've been doing the podcast, and I kind of lost sight of that. So here's what we're going to be doing. We are going to pivot. It's going to be the same podcast name, though. It's going to be the same host, which is yours truly. Sorry about that. I mean, for those of you guys that don't like me, honestly, if you don't like me, you're not listening, so who cares? But we're just going to shake things up again a bit. We're still going to have aspiring investors come on the show, but we are working on a new logo. We're putting the finishing touches on it, which is going to be a new headshot for me. I got to get a new headshot. The one I use is already a couple years old. We're going to do new episode formats as well. I think one thing that a lot of the aspiring investors who've been on the podcast have mentioned to me is there's a lot of sitting around with them not talking, and they only get a couple of minutes to explain. And then once they ask questions, it's really not their episode. They're kind of like a secondary player. So we're working on a way to bring the aspiring investor to the forefront, because that's what this podcast is about. And, we're still going to bring experienced investors on, and we're still going to be putting out a ton of content. So on the bright side, even though there's been a slight delay in episodes, this podcast in the end is going to be much, much better because of it. So anyway, thanks a lot. Thanks for your patience and support. And well, we'll keep on doing this and make it much better for everybody. All right, that's it.
Hey, if you like that episode, make sure to subscribe. But more importantly, if you haven't joined our multifamily educational community yet, which we call the Tribe of Titans, you are missing out. Get 30 days free by clicking the link in the description to this episode, or go to thetribeoftitans.info, and we'll see you there.